So it was a busy, and of course the summit continues today. But let's head to the commodities space now and see what's happening, especially with the response from Iran that there's no talks or plan of talks at this time concerning the war going on in Iran between Israel. And we have joining us for this manager research at Financial Derivatives Company, Dumebi Oluwole. Hi, Dumebi, good morning. Good to have you on the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so a lot of uncertainties there. Mr. Trump saying that talks are on, that's why he is held off the strike that they had planned. But on the other hand, Iran is saying no talks at all. So that leaves the world in the middle, in quagmire.
I mean, it's really what a lot of analysts like myself have been expecting over the last couple of months. The moment we saw the re-escalation and how tensions have brewed between both countries, it was very obvious that what we're seeing on the news is very different from what's happening behind closed doors. And the disconnect between both countries and the information that's put out there, of course, is rattling the markets. Today, we see oil prices significantly rising, and tomorrow we see oil prices plunging. And stock markets are also following the trend of what we are seeing as people are trying to, as investors really are trying to, take safer bets and more importantly, rotate their portfolio to kind of hedge against what exactly is going on. The talks that are actually happening are between Iran and Oman, and that's because they share a small passageway, not the Strait of Hormuz, but just a small passageway that ships could actually follow. And that conversation between Iran and Oman seems to be, moving forward. And if that proceeds, the markets are obviously pricing in a possible expansion or some movement of ships, out of the Strait of Hormuz towards that small passageway. And if that, of course, happens, we might see the market somewhat react with oil prices somewhat, falling. However, the tensions really and uncertainty between the US and Iran, and to some extent Israel, right now, we expect that the markets would definitely over-index on that, and that's really where the case lies right now.
Sometime last week, Saudi Arabia offered a bit of hope. I think there was an alternative plan by Saudi to allow ships pass through perhaps another passage. I wonder if you've heard of any updates on that.
Not necessarily. I think the conversations have really been between that strait between Iran and Oman, simply because that's closer to the Strait of Hormuz and it's easier for ships to route through that passageway. The conversation that I know about where Saudi Arabia really is involving itself is in form of diplomatic conversations between Iran and the US. Earlier in the week, we did hear of the Prince of Saudi Arabia speaking with Donald Trump to kind of, reduce the tensions, simply because if further airstrikes happen between US and Iran, where Donald Trump has outrightly said that he will attack civilian infrastructure, Iran would definitely retaliate, and that means that Saudi Arabia could take a hit. Saudi Arabia has taken a hit, in the course of the war, and if Donald Trump, of course, pushes through with his threats, would likely see, them being at the back burner of these airstrikes, and they are trying to reduce such implications, especially for not just only them but other Gulf countries like the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait, who have also received some fair share of blows this period.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, the impression I'm getting now is that the US is seeking peace. Iran is, the one that's looking at the war partner, because we know even the peace talks, ceasefire they had, I think, for about 2 weeks, it was Iran that started the first strike or re-strike. So does it look like Iran perhaps has held or found a weak point of the US and they're deciding to milk it? Would that be a correct assessment of the situation?
Actually, I would say no. Reason being that in the geopolitical tension between the US and Iran, it's not something that started today. It's a bigger issue that is between, the US and the Middle East, and how much of, havoc and issues that the US coinciding with Israel has caused in that region. Iran sits at a very intrinsic point in the war today. What they are asking for is, number one, sanctions be lifted off their oil so they are able to sell internationally. They are also asking that some of their assets that have been frozen be released to them. They've also asked that, the extension of Israel towards Pakistan is somewhat reduced, and that eases some tension within the Middle Eastern region. So there are a lot more issues, between the US, Israel, and Iran that, somewhat is buried in the news of airstrikes that is not exactly out there. If you look through the memorandum of understanding that they had before the re-escalation, you would see that even the news did put it, and I think I spoke about it here, that not everything the US is asking for Iran will be able to give, and not everything Iran is asking for the US would want to give because of their ties with Israel. And I think that brings Iran and of course the US between a rock and a hard place. And I guess the geopolitical tensions, remember I mentioned, it's more historical than just what exactly we're seeing on the surface. So Iran, of course, is fighting for its sovereignty. It's fighting for not just itself, but also the Middle Eastern region, where smaller countries like Libya, Lebanon, Jordan, that have been affected by, the Israeli extension, and of course its alliance with the US, it's of course fighting not just for itself, but the other countries. And I think that when we look at it through that lens, you will see that if they extensively agree to what the US is asking for, they will definitely not benefit from it. And I guess that's their current stance.
Well, all of this will drive back home energy costs, among other things.
Of course. And again, I think it boils down to the fact that as, developing countries, just like what, our WTO director was saying, that the comparative advantage that you have as a country is where really your power lies. And I think with this situation, we are seeing other emerging markets, of course, play their marks in resources that they have comparative advantage in to generate more revenue. We're seeing this happen with Burkina Faso. We're seeing this happen with Mali and cotton. Burkina Faso with gold and other industrial resources that they have. The DR Congo is also doing this with some lithium. Morocco is doing the same thing. I think Nigeria also needs to come to the table with that. While we see that, energy, the spike in energy prices is affecting the domestic market, it is not necessarily a situation that was wrought by the war, in my opinion. There have been other issues, that have led to Nigeria being in the situation it is today. Our inefficiencies, our lack of refinery infrastructure, we wrought this havoc on ourselves. And I think it's important that we really focus on that issue rather than the imported cost or the imported vulnerabilities that we brought that has been brought on Nigeria as a result of the war. Other countries have been edged.
Yeah, so I mean, the conversation still goes round to adding value.
Yes.
What you said, the WTO DG talked about. We have these potentials, we have the brains, we have the human resources, we have the natural resources, and yet we are getting peanuts for it because value is not being added. I guess more intentionality beyond the summits and the talks, that we would normally have. I guess that's the intentionality that Africa, not even just Nigeria, needs to focus on at this time.
Yes, you're very right. I think that the more we put these conversations on the back burner, the more exposed we are to external shocks. Nigeria still stands as one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. We have agricultural resources, we have mineral resources, and the fact that consistent conversations around, Nigeria's development, commodity prices escalating is still very much, at the front burner of our conversations. It's very disheartening and disappointing, if I must add. And I think that not until we begin to see more conscious implementation towards alleviating these macroeconomic issues that Nigeria experiences today, I guess we'll keep having this conversation. And my 2 cents on how we can have this growth inclusive is essentially making sure that states and pretty much subnationals, focus on resources that they have comparative advantage in. And listening to, the Delta State conversation it's something that I do believe that if other states, adopt, which I'm beginning to see a lot more happen, around, I think it would definitely uplift the model, reduce some of the responsibility on the federal government, and more importantly apply pressure on the states to improve their own revenue, add more resources, and more importantly institutionalize special economic zones to keep attracting long-term private capital. The moment we see all of this trickling in, the story of China, Malaysia in some resources, I think that we will definitely see that happen in Nigeria.
Yeah, of course, we hope that one day they will cite Nigeria and say, oh, the story of Nigeria coming from under there to on top there. And that will make, us proud, to carry the green passport. Well, thank you so much for joining on the program this morning. Dumebi Oluwole, Research Manager at Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a break. When we come back, our insurance sector, they had, of course, their recapitalization. The deadline was on Friday. Let's hear what the regulator has to say. After that, we know they've already told us 43 companies made it through. 8 of them are in the waiting. We'll get the update after this break. Please stay with us.